In the tapestry of life, where every thread holds a story, America in black and white emerges as a haven for the voices echoing through the heart of our communities. In this podcast, we wade through the rivers of our collective experiences, celebrating the vibrant hues of change brought forth by the whispers of hope and the roars of action. It's more than just a conversation. It's a journey into the heart of our society, illuminated by the light of those daring to dream and do. Join us, and let your voice be the melody that guides us toward a dawn where every color finds its place in the masterpiece of our shared destiny. Together, let's paint a future brimming with the positives that dwell in our minds and the actions that shape our world.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Veterans Day to all the veterans out there today. This is another episode of America in Black and White, and I am your host, Charles King. Tonight, our special guest is Mr. Reginald Reggie Williams. Reginald is a strategic advisor, educator, and entrepreneur with more than 15 years of experience driving growth across the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. As a founder and CEO of Oak Lane, Reggie partners with C suite leaders to design scalable business strategies, lead organizational transformation, and unlock new revenue opportunities through innovative planning and market positioning. He has advised nationally recognized organizations, including the City of Boston, the Equality Fund, Give Black, Alliance, United Way of Massachusetts Bay, Eras Corporation, and Innovative at BU. His career spans leadership roles in corporate innovation and government affairs at Blue Cross Blue Shield of Massachusetts, strategic communications at the Massachusetts Budget and Policy Center, and fundraising strategy at the Transformative Culture Project. Currently pursuing his doctorate at NYU Steinhardt, Reggie's research explores leadership, innovation, and workforce development. He also holds a master's in public policy from Tufts University, where he served as a leader and faculty advisor at the Derby Entrepreneurship Center. A longtime advocate for inclusive growth and creative economies, Reggie has held board and advisory roles with Mass Creative, the Democ Center, and BAMS Fest. His work reflects a deep commitment to building equitable systems, fostering innovation, and empowering communities through education, strategy, and culture. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Reginald Williams. Hello, sir.
Charles, thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to be here. Happy Veterans Day to all of the veterans in our communities, and thank you again for this opportunity.
Oh, yes, sir. Is there anything you'd like to add to your bio before we get into the show?
No, I think
Yeah.
I think that about covers it. I'm really excited to dive into tonight's conversation.
Well, thank you. Look, we'll start first where I'd like for people to get an understanding, and you tell us a little bit about your entrepreneurship and Oak Lane. Can you tell us what inspired you to launch Oak Lane?
Sure. So Oak Lane actually started as a pandemic venture that I named Our Strategy. As a pandemic entrepreneur, we were dealing with such market disruption where businesses, nonprofits were really struggling and thinking through how they could really pivot and grow and sustain their efforts over time. When folks kept asking me for advice around how they could potentially pivot or sustain some of their nonprofit ventures, having worked here in the greater Boston ecosystem for over a decade at the time, around helping businesses launch, scale, and grow their efforts. I said, hey, you know what? I can actually lean into my entrepreneurship journey myself. I've done this type of advising on a one-on-one basis. I've worked with leaders around their efforts. Why not take my journey seriously as well and see what I can do? So our strategy started as really an effort where an hour of my time was an hour of yours. And as you can imagine in the market, hourly work is something that is really dicey depending on the industry that you're in. So after working and advising some organizations for a couple of years, I decided to reincorporate my business as Oak Lane. And oak lane means it really represents not only having deep roots, so thinking about the roots of an oak tree, but helping business owners and leaders find different lanes and opportunities and connective tissues to really think about challenges differently. And we do that through this framework called design thinking, which is really just about taking people centered approaches to solving these problems head on. So after 5 years now of operating this business and leveraging my work experience, I'm really excited to be able to partner with some of the organizations that you mentioned, so with small business owners, and then also some social impact leaders around what transformation needs to look like and how we can really sustain businesses over time.
Wow. So in that name, does that name also mean anything personal to you? Because in thinking about an oak tree being rooted deep into the ground and how it grows,
Yeah.
what's the personal part of that?
For me, Oak Lane really represents a returning to home and a returning to self. And when I think about the roots of entrepreneurship, they run deep in my family. My mother is a master cosmetologist and a business owner who's been operating her business for over 20 years here in the greater New England area. I have family members like my grandfather also on my father's side served as an entrepreneur as well. And when I think about the different roots and the heritage and the legacy that I carry forward as an entrepreneur, helping to make sure that those coming behind me, like my younger siblings, have opportunities to explore what their entrepreneurial journeys can look like. It is really about devising those different lanes and thinking about what access to opportunity can look like and being able to really see the forest for the trees. That's often something that I say. So I think outside of all the tree metaphors, I won't get too deep into the weeds with that. But Oak Lane really it represents that return to self, that return to home, and the roots that I carry forward in my journey on a day to day basis.
Oh, wow. So how does Oak Lane differentiate itself from other consulting firms?
There are a lot of consulting firms, and that's a great question. A lot of consulting firms in the market that focus on marketing and communications. And I think we've all heard the expression that says that there's nothing new under the sun. Most small businesses are not actually innovating or doing something that is completely new and novel. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, close to 90, if not 95% of small businesses have a different iteration of what an existing product or service offering is looking like in the market. So I gave the example of my mother's hair salon, for example, or a barber shop. Their barbershops are a dime a dozen. Hair salons can be a dime a dozen. But how are you differentiating yourself in the market? For us at Oak Lane, we focus on revenue operations. So we look at revenue, sales, and customer success through design thinking as a way that in which we really work to co-create solutions with our partners. And we see ourselves as growth partners for our clients. So we really work deeply with them and advising them on their challenges and how we can really test and iterate and refine the solutions over time so that we get the competitive intelligence needed to be successful, as well as making sure that they have the support needed to really bring those solutions to market.
Run us through that process. How does that look just on just on an example basis from beginning to end? What does that look like?
So, what I like to say is that often when people come to us, they think that they might have a problem with their dishwasher, but they actually don't realize that they have a plumbing problem. So, what we do is we start by taking a really I'm going to say comprehensive, but it depends on capacity, and it also depends on our clients. Not only their capacity but their ability really to dive deeper into those issues. So we start by taking a really exhaustive look at what the challenges are. So going back to like a website design example. So we'll start by saying like, okay, so what's your existing website platform? What are your goals for your website? Do you know who your audiences are? Do you have a game plan around what your marketing strategy needs to look like? And then as we get a little bit further into working to unpack and really define the problem which they've came to us for, we work to really come up with some potential solutions based off of what that initial take looks like. So they might say, hey, you know what, I'm looking to convert more leads into actual closed business, or I'm looking to launch a new product or service. Based off of that, they really need the opportunity also to really come up with some I think the larger suite of potential solutions in the universe, map those things out against what their actual business strategy looks like. And that's where we get to the differentiation around you think that you might have this one type of problem, but actually when you open up your aperture, you open up the lens, you're able to see that you have a much larger opportunity at hand. But it starts by knowing what's going on with your business as well as with your opportunity. And then from there, we focus on one kind of narrow scope to get started, and then we see where we can go from there.
Well, I guess the good thing is it sounds like you're saying that you guys are not a cookie cutter. And so basically you customize based on the client. And so when a client comes to you, I guess you have to do that whole forensic scalable thing to, to dive deep and get all the data, and then you put it in the machine and file, here we go, this is what we got.
Yeah, it takes the discovery process is interesting because we definitely dive deep into, okay, so like here's what we heard and here's what we think that you might need to go with. And that process is one really from stemming from design thinking. It's really about falling in love, as I said earlier, with the problem. And I think that a lot of entrepreneurs, a lot of small business owners and leaders, while they have an idea around what they're looking for in terms of business transformation and growth, they don't often know what the actual steps are to get there. So helping people reverse engineer those steps based off of the ideal state. So where are you trying to go? What are you looking to do in the market? And what's the time frame of that change? Okay, great. Let's scale it back and say, what can we do within the first 30, 60, 90 days? What does success look like in the next 6 to 12 months? And I think that, especially at this time in the market, there's so much up in the air. You need to be nimble and you need to be able to adjust and pivot in real time. So keeping our eyes on that prize, but being flexible about how we get there. That's a part of where, you got to come in. Sometimes you got to throw a different play in, like things on the court, things on the field aren't looking like you think they might be looking. It's time to shift a bit, but keep closing the feedback loop so that you know what you're doing with your business resources, what's working, what's not, and how you can bring that institutional knowledge forward for your members of your team and for your clients and your work overall.
Mhm. So, what's the most challenging aspect of being a founder?
Ooh. Charles, I don't know how much time we have. Um, I think for me, the hardest or the most challenging part of being a founder is balancing wearing all of the hats. I've seen these videos on Instagram where folks will be having staff meetings with themselves, where it's like, like from the chief revenue officer to the chief marketing officer to the accountant to the bookkeeper to the social media person. It is a lot of different hats to wear, and I think that my skill set and the learnings that I had from working with social impact programs, working in policy, working in healthcare innovation, they gave me good glimpses into some of the nuggets and the gems that I needed to learn to be successful in doing the work that I do today. But there's also a lot that I don't know. And, having a real effort and lens around how to continue education, how to continue learning, how to continue staying fresh in the market, it makes our solutions better. I have a really great team that I'm fortunate enough to work with and to lean on, so they fill gaps that I may have. But it is really a balancing act, and I think that, like in that vein of having to wear all of the hats, decision fatigue around what to focus on can be very easy as a founder because you need to focus on all of the things. You need to focus on growth. You need to focus on lead gen. You need to focus on sales. You need to focus on closing deals. But that's also very different than the back end administrative work of running a business, tax filings, accounting and bookkeeping. So knowing when to bring in support and when to bring in the right folks to help you grow and scale is something that I've been really fortunate over this season to be continuing to invest in.
So, can you share a success story where Oak Lane transformed an organization?
Ooh. I think in terms of business transformation for an organization, um, a lot of our clients are in different industries. So it's interesting thinking about what transformation can look like for, let's say, higher ed versus a nonprofit. One of our clients who we did a design project with, it was really exciting to have the chance to work with them on the back end of revamping their website and their communications. As small teams, we come in as growth partners to really help these organizations work on what the baseline communications need to look like. So thinking through what your marketing strategy needs to look like, maybe emails, newsletter, and then being able to take and help them develop those assets. It was really powerful to have a client tell us that not only was their redesigned theory of change something that was really successful in terms of helping them secure a multi-year commitment for some of their efforts, but also just to see the true joy in the actual point of contact around what making these assets look like for them in terms of actually having the materials that spoke cleanly to their work, how they're working to transform communities, and what that looks like to be able to help scale impact across their industry. And when I think about that, that work is really, it means everything to me to be able to really support folks and meet them where they're at and help them tell a better story. We focus on systems, storytelling, and strategy as our focus on revenue operations, and that's just one example. When I think about some of like our work in higher education, we just got done producing innovate at BU's Student Innovation Conference, IdeaCon, which is the largest cross-college student innovation conference in the nation, and working to make sure that students from diverse backgrounds, non-traditional students have opportunities to exposure to what such a large student innovation gathering looks like in terms of networking, in terms of pitching and bringing an idea to light. It means everything to have access to opportunity. And I think that that's what a lot of our work focuses on, helping folks see the access to the opportunity that they have in front of them.
So, how do you balance innovation with practicality in entrepreneurship?
How do I balance innovation with practicality in entrepreneurship?
Hmm.
I think for me, balancing innovation and practicality looks like having a true foot on the I'll say a true thumb on the needle around what innovation needs to look like. And I think that often folks can see innovation as this really big thing that needs to happen. So like we'll say innovation with a capital I versus innovation just with, a lowercase I. Like so
Okay.
moving from just using a spreadsheet to actually implementing a system like a MailChimp or maybe a CRM like HubSpot can be that innovation that you need to be able to automate some of your processes to save time and to help you do business a bit better. But people think that innovation needs to look like going from here to the moon overnight. It doesn't. Innovation starts within each of us as individuals, and it really comes down to the mindset that I mentioned earlier of being able to take a step back, assess what's working, assess what's not, and then come up with some ideas that you can test over time. That for me gets into where practicality comes in, being able to say, hey, you know what, we're not going to be able to do everything this quarter. And that is okay. Or you know what, we had to launch this product and actually that product was it was a chop, it was a fail, it was a flop, and that's okay too. Failure is okay. It's a part of the process. How you take the learnings forward and how you move forward from there to help develop an action plan and a game plan and carrying that institutional knowledge forward is really the work. And that's what practicality looks like. We're not going to bat 1,000% every time that we're at the plate, but that doesn't mean that we can't be successful in taking those learnings and improving our game over time.
So, I heard you mention MailChimp. So you guys train businesses to use CRM systems as well?
We've done some of that advising, yes, and I think that those types of advising engagements are ones that they also come with a lot of learnings for us because as you think about our depth and knowledge base on systems like MailChimp or Canva, the amount of time and the amount of attention it takes to really help folks onboard and set those systems up for success, it really requires longer term engagements than what some of our clients initially anticipate. And I think that as we've worked through that process of learning just what our clients need and how to meet them at the depth and at the scope of where they're at, we're able to create some training. So we created like some videos to help kind of train and walk folks through those systems. But it's up to us as individuals to really go in and to do the actual work in the system. And that's where it gets to business transformation when it becomes a part of your processes, a part of your standard operating procedures. And you know that you have from A to F, you have these 6 things, these 6 steps that you do to get from that initial point of contact into your system and that you're following up and tracking it through that system.
Oh, wow. So, well, tell us this. Like, what is your engagement? Like in the communities with the small businesses and companies that are around you, or some of the people around you. What's the community engagement like for your company, and how do people see Oakland?
That's a great question. In terms of community engagement, so we're a member of the Greater Boston Chamber of Commerce. We work with some of the local chambers of commerce around training and supporting entrepreneurs and being successful. As I mentioned, we work with some higher education institutions and we have some nonprofit and some small business clients. And a lot of those client engagements come from what the backgrounds of myself and my team members have, having worked across these industries. And I think really, as is for most business in general, it's about networking and about relationships. So how you're able to sustain your relationships with folks over time, share your learnings and your knowledge with them, and create really, I'd say like a learning exchange and community has been really helpful. Um, from my days in fundraising, I think back to like donor touch points where it's like you've got to have 7 or 8 touch points with folks before you can set them up for an ask if you need to ask them for a grant or ask them for some sponsorship dollars. A lot of that work is very transactional. What I'd like to think is that folks see Oak Lane as truly a growth partner. So we're not just looking to do business we do just for the sake of doing business. We want to see you be successful in the long haul, because as you're working with us to implement the solutions or the frameworks that we're helping you develop, we want to also come back and see how they're working for you. We want to make sure that you have what you need, that you have the understanding, and that the scope of the frameworks and the context matches your needs, so that it's a win-win for both of us. And I think that that's also a part of our differentiator, where some folks will just set you up and hand things off. I like to make sure that we circle back and say, hey, like, how's this going for you in November, December 2025? What are things looking like in March 2026? So having those quarterly, biannual touch points with folks just to see, hey, how are you doing? How is this working for you? And how have you been able to implement these solutions over time? How have you adapted them? Because, what we started with isn't necessarily what we need in the long haul, but it's the bridge to get us there. So it's nice to be able to circle back, as I said, and have those conversations and touch points with partners to see what's working.
So, what advice would you give to aspiring entrepreneurs of color?
In terms of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs of color, I would say start, start, start. When I think about rates of starting businesses, a lot of businesses start, but not many businesses are surviving that first 2 to 5 year failure rate. And it's because, as we think about the ideas that we had when we initially started a business, we might be holding on too hard to those initial ideas versus changing and pivoting with time and energy after really evaluating what's working well with business and what's not. You've got to be hard, as I said earlier, stubborn about the goal, but flexible about the means. So thinking about what the ultimate end goal needs to look like for your business, it's an opportunity for you to really iterate. So you might start off and think that you need to have let's say a tech venture. You might think that you need to start the next, I'll use ChatGPT and AI as an example, because AI is now a dime a dozen. You need to have the next GPT on the market. Maybe not. Maybe you need to actually look at OpenAI solutions and see what products they have and how you might be able to customize or tweak something so that you don't need to start from scratch, but you're able to reach the goals that you're looking to reach with your product or your service offering. When we think about the success rates of businesses in terms of actually getting over some of the venture capital and the capital to access challenges that they have, developing relationships with folks. So I think about the local banks, the folks that are in the financial services industry who have opportunities and training for entrepreneurs to be successful. There's a lot of free game out there where, between YouTube University and between some of these programs that are sponsored by public and private partnerships, there's a lot of opportunity, but you have to be willing to go out there, be new at something, be willing to learn, and just put yourself out there. I'd say that's the main thing. Folks don't know what you need unless you ask. So being willing to say, hey, I'm looking to do this. Would you be willing to support in a conversation, just an exploratory conversation, a coffee chat, to get some feedback, to get some inspiration, and to get some validation that your idea is actually one worth starting, or one worth that, with that tweak, it could be the next big thing. It can make all of the difference.
So, how do you measure success as an entrepreneur beyond revenue?
How do I measure success as an entrepreneur beyond revenue? I think for me, success really lies in what we're able to help people achieve, and achieving the willingness to see yourself as an entrepreneur, to see your value in the market, to see that your skill set is one that folks will hire and will work with, is something that's really powerful for me, because I think of that as a leader. It's really important for us to make sure that the people that we work with and the people that we're bringing up have what they need to be successful. And often a number of the folks on my team and a number of folks that we work with in community have been asked to, as millennials, to be the most educated generation in the nation in our history, but to not get their fair share of the market. I know so many folks who are looking for opportunities to do side projects to bring in additional income. And when we think about folks not having that space to think about really where to get their start, being able to partner with folks and help them see their zone of genius. So thinking through what you could potentially do and offer, helping them draw those tissues so that they can see how their skills are transferable. So maybe you didn't work in sales before, but if you have had to upsell products in some capacity, you might have a sales background that you're not really leaning on, but you have to be able to, as I said earlier, see the forest for the trees. So helping folks see that forest and kind of wade through it so that they can get to the other side is how one of the ways in which I measure success. And I think the other way that I measure success is really, um, it's really contingent upon really deciding that success doesn't have to look like a 10x growth moment overnight. For me, it's a marathon, not a sprint. How I started my business to where my business is now, things look a little different. And I know that I wanted to bring folks in because I didn't want to have to do everything by myself. I didn't want to just be a solopreneur. It's lonely, working on all of these, wearing all of those different hats that I mentioned on your own. So being able to be in a predicament where I'm able to work with really talented people to help them see their zones of genius, as I said, and then bring real innovative solutions to light. It makes all the difference for me. And I'm excited to see what we can do in the next 5, 10, 20 years, God willing, to continue supporting businesses and leaders in reaching success for themselves.
So, how do you help that one entrepreneur that decided he or she wanted to just start their business, which to them and what you can see, that's a successful venture in the beginning. How do you help them get to that next level?
Yeah. I think it really starts with mapping out the foundation of what they're looking to achieve and what that foundation needs to look like from an infrastructure perspective. Because when I think about, I'm trying to think of some examples that are really apples to apples. So going back to like the barbershop that I mentioned earlier, as a barber, you work and own your own book of business. So how you get clients, how you close those cuts, you got to make sure that your edges are crisp, that you get your T-bars right. You got to make sure that you are doing what needs to be done in the chair. But that's also different than also thinking about marketing your services. So making sure that you're doing the highlight reels of a good cut, that you're getting the testimonials. That's one particular type of business. When we think about entrepreneurs in general, a lot of folks have a lot of ideas that they think about bringing to the market, but if they haven't done the research around what solutions exist, taking that initial stab at actually doing the research, getting a sense of what exists in the market, what the market opportunity looks like. So how many customers or clients that you might have in this particular area that you can serve, and then what are some of the opportunities and the hurdles that you need? So what are the certifications that you might need? What type of insurance? It's different if you're a food-based business versus like a med spa. There's so many different lanes in which people can take. It's really about helping folks just kind of map out what those core building blocks are. And then from there, you start to stack them up. So, you've got the baseline research. Great. We've taken that research from discovery. Now we're going to layer on what the steps are. Now that you've got the steps mapped out, what are the next things that you need to do versus what are the things that you need support on to be successful? And how do we make sure that you keep layering those things on one step at a time and keep closing those feedback loops so that you know what's working, what's not, so you don't end up in a predicament where you might have gotten too far down a road and you realize that you didn't have the right licensure and then you end up in trouble. And we're not attorneys nor financial service advisors. We don't do any of that type of advising. We really focus on what the marketing, on the communications, and on the strategy can look like for folks to be successful, and refer them to partners who have the expertise and the credentials to do the things that we do.
So, what role does mentorship play in your entrepreneur journey?
Mentorship has played a truly tremendous role in my entrepreneurship journey. As a young person, I remember working at the hair salon that my mother worked at before she opened her salon. And I started out folding towels, answering phones, and being able just to learn a little bit about what opening and closing a register looked like, learning how to professionally have a conversation. And when I think about how that has really set and laid the foundation for the work that I do today, I think about how I can continue to make sure that I'm supporting and providing those opportunities to the next generation. It's something that over the course of my career, I've worked with young people. I started out in a program teaching young people digital media and video production as a workforce development model. So my first job, I never would have thought I'd be using cameras to tell stories and work to counter narratives around what Black and brown communities look like. Those foundational skill sets gave me the storytelling chops to continue telling stories just like we're doing right now, 20 years later, and thinking about what narratives need to look like in communities, particularly at a time like this. The real difference is that we have so much access. We have telephones that are computers in our hands now. We've got AI and language learning models processing more data deep fake, AI, there's so many different things going on, but making sure that folks have the literacy, the understanding around what opportunity looks like for them, what the systems and the tools that they need to be successful can look like, are things that we are excited to have chance to have some interns at Oak Lane to support, to being able to make sure that folks have exposure to those opportunities, so that they can really grow over time. And I think that mentorship is a two-way street. So when I think about the sponsors and the folks who have elevated and brought my name into opportunities, which has helped open up doors for our team, I wouldn't be where I am today without those folks, those individuals who have consistently seen and believed in my ability, who have pushed me in ways in which I needed to grow, where I might have been a little resistant at the time. We could say that for another day, but I've really, I've learned a lot and I've grown a lot because of having mentors and sponsors who have been willing to see, the opportunity that existed within me and to see what potential existed within me. And I'm really grateful for that.
Oh, wow. How do you approach risk taking in
Oh,
business?
risk taking. That's interesting. When I think about risk, there's risk management is something that companies do on a day-to-day basis to make sure that as they're thinking about opportunities in the market, that they're not stepping too far in the wrong direction or moving too far off of what growth and success looks like for them based off of their objectives and the key performance indicators, the KPIs that they set for themselves. When I think about risk, it's something that needs to be taken on a calculated basis. So you've got to weigh the pros and cons. You need to make sure that you have an understanding of what happens if you do this, what happens if you don't, and you got to think about the opportunity cost too. So starting a business, it doesn't take much to start a business, but depending on how you start a business, you might be set up where you have different types of accounting and filing that you need to do versus doing it in a particular way. You've got to weigh out those costs. What works for you? How do you make sure that you have what you need to be successful? Um, you got to talk to some folks and make sure that you've got the right counsel on board to be successful with that. And when we think about the long-term implications of that, um, one thing that it's interesting, I've had conversations with some folks around is like the length of business and the time frame. So, they say the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today. So if you don't start on paper, you don't have the the business longevity. You don't have the start date, the EIN. It makes it difficult when you want to apply for like a line of credit or maybe a credit card for your business or a business account. You want to make sure that you're doing things in the right steps so that as you're building out those steps, as you're building out your business, you have the right steps in place and you've taken the right actions to be successful. And that's what risk is. You've got to take calculated steps towards progress and measure what's working and what's not. Um, Closed mouths don't get fed. So you gotta, not everything's going to be a win. So you also have to, swing and see what's working. And if it doesn't work, you take those learnings and then you apply them for the next round.
What's next for Oak Lane in the coming years?
Oak Lane in the coming years. That's a great question, Charles. I'm really excited to see what Oak Lane's growth trajectory looks like based off of some of um, the recent projects that we've been working on. So, in terms of working more with intermediaries, so individuals who are convening and working to support business owners and leaders around what growth and transformation and storytelling looks like, is something that's really exciting. And when I think about what that looks like in 2025. 2030 could look very different based off of how quickly things have progressed in this year. So when we think about what artificial intelligence and what these new systems have done to really transform how people are coding, to transform how they're building websites, to transform how they're telling stories. Will we be AI avatars having this conversation at one point? I don't know. I'd like to keep the human element as much as I can, but I'm never going to say never. We're excited to continue deepening our partnerships with folks on a local and on a national basis to provide these types of services to partners who are looking for business transformation or advisory that can really help them grow and scale. And I'd love to see what this work looks like on an international basis over time as well. There's so many different sources of inspiration that we have in the world. And I think that, being in New England, being in this market, we have a lot of resources. how can we take best practices and learn from others in different markets to bring new solutions to light? And that's something that, in terms of a listening tour and being hyper local, as one of my mentors would say, being able to, get outside with purpose and continue connecting and growing and developing alongside folks is something that I'm excited for. And seeing what scaling this practice looks like is something that I'm excited to see what it looks like on the other side of that. And I'm excited to see who I am on the other side of that as well.
Hmm. Okay. Well, so as we think about, your entrepreneurship and what you're doing here at Oak Lane, let's go a little bit deeper here into you as a business advisor, as well as the consulting work that you do, because I'm sure that they're hand in hand, mutually exclusive. But I'm sure there's some separatism that goes into that makes all of this work. And let's start with this. What's your first step? What's the first step you take when advising a new client?
The first step that I take when advising a new client is scoping out what the challenge is. So we start with a discovery. So we start with discovery. So really, if you're looking for fundraising support, if you're looking for marketing support, if you're looking for really just more business strategy and advising, starting by just getting a sense of what's actually working. How do we get here? And then what you're looking to do is how we do it. I don't know. You probably can maybe see this over my shoulder. I love post-it. So no, okay. Love post-it. So thinking through how we can make sure that we map these things out, and then I kind of move these pieces around like checkers or on a chessboard, so that way we can kind of group and draw some parallels around what we're hearing, and making sure that from there that we're hearing those things correctly from the context of the business owner, and then taking a deeper dive from there into what their growth opportunity would look like in an ideal state. Because I think that a lot of folks have an idea, as I said earlier, around what growth could look like, but they don't realize that the steps or the actions needed to do that may look a little different. And that's where we stay. So after that discovery process, we then move into some empathy. So really diving deeper into what the pain points are. And I think that a lot of the advising work that we do ends up a little bit like coaching, so looking at really just taking a deeper step back into saying, well, what's working about this for the business versus how's it working for you as an individual? And that's something that I encourage every entrepreneur and business owner to do with themselves, like through reflection, through journaling, just being able to say, taking the data and the story that's coming from the data versus what is working for you as an individual, to then map that out a bit further.
So, how do you help organizations unlock new revenue opportunities?
We do revenue. So, and that's where the real differentiation is around our practice as a marketing agency. As I said earlier, revenue is really tied to the story that you're telling. So when we think about the story that you're telling your customers, the story that you're telling your funders, the story that you're telling partners, it's really about taking an evaluative approach. And some folks have a hard time actually capturing those insights and those data points so that they can tell that story. When I think about how we're able to really tell and synthesize impact together, telling those stories comes down to really making sure that you have the systems in place to do that. We help businesses unlock those new revenue opportunities by actually taking a look, as you said earlier, that forensic look at what those systems look like. So that way we can say, hey, tell us what your gross impact looks like. How many folks are you serving? Where are those folks coming from? What communities are they coming from? What languages do they speak? What's the gross revenue of the clients and the folks that you serve? When we start to ask those questions and clients aren't able to tell us those answers, it starts to help them shift their mindset and their approach around thinking about what revenue needs to look like and what that storytelling needs to look like. And then from there, we help them map out those stories. So that way, when they're thinking about how they are pitching and selling and closing new business for themselves, they have what they need to be successful, so that they have those data points, right? Because as we know, folks love a data point. You got to have something to cite, like you've got to be able to talk about your business and talk about it from a numbers perspective so that folks know that you're taking it seriously. If you have these kind of loosey goosey answers, folks will start to question what's actually working and what's not. You've got to be hard about actually evaluating those processes. And that's what we hope folks do so that they can map that against the stories that they need to tell to get to new partnerships and new client opportunities.
Mhm. What's the biggest misconception about business consulting?
Hmm. I think for me, the biggest misconception about business consulting is that a lot of folks hire consultants as work for hire. So they're looking at consultants to come in and close internal capacity gaps, what we'd like to do as advisors is make sure that we're working with teams who are fishermen and they're looking to fish more efficiently. Because as we think about the internal gaps, unless you're going to bring on a team and then also onboard them, sustain that transition period as you're hiring new people, getting them up to speed to take on those responsibilities and manage those systems, there's often a bit of rubber friction point around what the initial onset of the project looks like versus the end output. And we want to make sure that we are solving for as much of that as possible by onboarding folks with the systems in mind at first. So that way we're working on the systems development. The systems are a part of your institutional knowledge. And then from there, what you do with those systems, you need to adapt and evolve them over time. So we've had some clients where we started with a type A, like a 1.0 version, knowing that they might need a 3.0 version, but you got to get through 1.0, right? You've got to be able to get through working with this initially, having the institutional knowledge and practice around this, and then see what the 2.0 can look like. Everyone wants the Bentley off top, but sometimes you got to start with a Buick. Sometimes you got to start with a Bronco. Sometimes you got to start with a Honda and then get towards that energy after actually working and understanding what some of the back-end systems management needs to look like, the costs associated with that. And those expenses can be costly if you make them too quickly. So taking the step of like really the low and slow approach and constantly evaluating what's working, what's not, is how we think about really transforming what business consulting can look like. So folks just don't see us as the guns for hire or the work for hire that is not helping them get to where they need to go, and they don't feel like they've gotten a good return on their investment.
Okay, let me give you an example. I come into your business, I'm seeking consulting, and I tell you that I just know I'm ready, and I want you to start me out on 3.0.
Mm-hmm.
What do you do if they're not ready for 3.0?
Yeah. I would have to say just that, based off of what we've seen. So based off the discovery, based off of the investments that you've made in these systems to date, and based off of your growth goals, what we'd actually recommend is that you start with, let's stick with like HubSpot as an example. So before you go with the bells and whistles version of HubSpot with the podcasting suite and with the sales emails, like let's just start you off with just actually using the CRM function. The free version versus like the starter pack is a great place to start, so that as you're building towards having the muscle and the memory and the knowledge around doing the 3.0 work, you have the opportunity to ramp up into that. And you can do that at any point. You can always upgrade your services at any time, but starting off with too much can also sometimes cloud the field of work that you need to really do initially to get to where you need to go. Let's just start by using the system. Let's just see how that works. And if it's working for you and the team, let's think about how many seats you need, how many, and what that aggregate cost is for the year, so that you can plan for that. And then you can start the next quarter, the next year off with that in mind. And you can also plan for what that needs to look like, because there's a cost of business associated with transitioning systems as much as there are starting new systems. And often we're trying to run and chew gum and walk and play ball all at the same time. And you can be running a lot without running much of anywhere. We want to prevent folks from doing that by taking that measured approach to what implementation needs to look like.
How do you tailor strategies for nonprofits versus corporations?
That's a great question. In terms of nonprofit strategy, nonprofits as 501c3s or maybe 501c6s for like some of the chambers of commerce, as charitable contributions and organizations, they have opportunities to do things in the market that small businesses may not. So when we think about some nonprofits, for example, who are fiscal sponsors, they leverage their 501c3 status to help businesses or other nonprofits bring efforts to light or bring in revenue that is grant dollars, for example. That's a little different from what it looks like as a small business. We tailor those strategies by really focusing on what the nonprofits need to be successful. So in terms of looking at board management, looking at their staffing infrastructure, looking at their strategic planning and thinking through what their challenges look like, we start with that. So if you don't have a strategic plan, okay, great. We can work on what a straw model would look like for this initial 6 to 12 months, but you have to have some goal in mind, and you have to have that goal measured against what your income looks like, what your partnerships look like, and what your business model looks like. Because nonprofits are businesses too. It's just a different classification, but it is a type of business. It's different for small businesses or corporations. Small business owners, as we know, are running a mile a minute. Larger businesses, they've got the institutional muscle, they've got maybe actuaries, they've got the risk management team. They're thinking about things much differently. They also approach risk much differently, right? So when they think about vetting and bringing in consultants, they've got a team of folks who is coming in and looking and evaluating proposals. And having worked in corporate, working with some supplier inclusion programs, it's nice to have an understanding of how folks are looking at businesses in that aspect and helping to convey that to business owners and nonprofits around making sure that, as I said earlier, you've got your data together. You've got to be able to tell a story. Folks are going to ask you those numbers. They want to know what's going on. They want to know what your impact metrics look like. They want to know how you're evaluating things, and making the time and the space to do that helps set you up so that you have the knowledge as much as the people who need your knowledge or to know what your program or your business is doing to see if they want to play ball with you. You have to have those things in mind, and you have to have that stuff developed. So it's easier to start doing it and to have the muscle memory around doing it than to not, because it'll save you a lot of headache down the line, a lot of headache down the line.
Reggie, I'm coming to Oak Lane, and look, I've got a lot of potential. I got a lot of good things going on. I'm not organized, but I'm just looking all toe up and raggedy. Yeah. What you gonna do to help me out?
We're gonna sit down. We're gonna start by just saying, you know what, it's okay. It's okay, because you know what, sometimes I think we all have, I'm not gonna speak for everybody, but most folks may have that drawer in the house that just kind of collects a bunch of stuff, or that room, or that, the trunk in the car. It's okay to not have the stuff together, but you have to have a game plan around what organization needs to look like for you. So starting by mapping those things out, just put all the stuff out there. It's interesting because I actually had to do this with my team. It's funny enough. So as a small business owner, I try different things. I've tried different softwares and subscriptions, and I was gathering these things like infinity stones. It's like, oh, $5.99 here, $9.99 there. It starts to add up. So I mapped it all out. And we were hosting a workshop, and one of my colleagues was like, Reggie, you need to show this map. I was like, I don't know if people need to see this much inside my kitchen just yet. I was like, hold on. It was really fascinating to have work with my team, just to say, you know what? Let's just think about all the systems that we're using and how we're using them. Does everyone have access to these systems? Do we need all of these systems? Are these systems duplicative of one another? Being able to take a step back, even as a business owner, I do it. Like, we all have the opportunity that we need to be successful, but you got to make space for that. That's very different than bringing in new business, closing deals, staying compliant. It's just like, hey, here's a system I tried. We had a free trial. The trial lapsed. They've got your credit card information. Now they're charging you monthly. You don't see that money coming out. But if you're not getting the most out of that software or service, it's hurting you in the long run. You've got to be really, really dedicated and really on top of managing and keeping the thumb on what your business is doing, so that it's not running you, you're running it. And I would encourage that. I don't think that the raggedy toe up moment is one that anyone is unaware of. But it's just about saying, you know what, it's okay. The first thing to do is accept it. Great. And now we're going to come up with a game plan on how we can solve it together.
Can you share an example of leading organizational transformation?
So leading organizational transformation, an example. We have a nonprofit client that started out as a small business, actually. And this was an organization that I've been working with since 2020, 2021. The organization started out as a small business, and between the co-founders coming together and working to determine what this work and investment needed to look like in practice, was one that, after looking at their business model, they said, hey, you know what? This is how we've operated to date, but what could further investment and growth look like? It turned out that growth and development looked like needing to transform from a for-profit to a nonprofit entity. Why? Because some of the programs that they were looking to do, they were spending money externally on that fiscal sponsor that I mentioned. So someone else to help them bring in grant dollars. They wanted to focus on fundraising strategy and supporting workforce development initiatives. It made a lot of sense for them to become a nonprofit and helping to guide and shift them into that work. It looked like me stepping in as an advisor to really help unpack what these challenges look like, think about what the cost benefit analysis of being a nonprofit would look like, and then also to working with them on their fundraising strategy. So working with them to develop a fundraising tracking system and thinking about what all of that work could look like in practice has supported their efforts around upskilling and reskilling creative entrepreneurs. And it's something that I'm excited to see what other businesses can do in the market, because as it's funny, I was having a conversation with one of my colleagues the other day. Not every business needs to be a full-fledged business, the same way that not every nonprofit needs to be its own 501c3. It's okay for it to just be a fiscally sponsored project. I've worked with some businesses or some nonprofits actually that started out as fiscally sponsored projects, and they've now grown to becoming behemoths in the market, producing massive events and doing really great work. But it's all been about the founder or the individual and their stick-to-itiveness to their idea and their vision and taking that to task. You've got to be really clear on what you want to do. You've got to be really clear about what that needs to look like and how you need to do that work for it to be successful. And I think that folks who have it, and they've got it down, and they know how to ask for the help and the partnership that it takes to get there. Folks who are looking for that, they have the opportunity to partner and to bring folks in so that they can get to where they need to go. And there's no one wrong way or approach to do that, but it's about knowing yourself, knowing how you work, and knowing what the work needs to look like for you to achieve that vision. And those are some examples of what transformation has looked like organizationally for some of the folks that we've worked with.
So, how do you approach advising C-suite leaders?
I approach advising C-suite leaders.
Mhm.
The approach is it's interesting because C-suite leaders have a number of different demands on their time and on their capacity. So when we think about the average C-suite leader who might have anywhere from 6 to 10 direct reports, who's looking at up and down the organizational ladder, so thinking about either board management and whether that's a for-profit or a nonprofit board, so thinking about shareholder responsibilities, thinking about their board of trustees as a nonprofit or the board of directors. It comes down to making sure that the business leader has the support that they need internally, and that they also have the culture and the opportunity to really invest in what that transformation needs to look like. So we've had some clients who are looking to bring new solutions to market, and they know that they have team members who are adverse or a little stuck in a legacy mindset around what that looks like. And I'm like, well, how are you modeling what this type of business transformation needs to look like from a cultural perspective? Are you showing openness? Are you having those conversations with your peers in the C-suite? Are you empowering leaders up and down the chain to have those conversations with their direct reports to get to where you need to go? Those moments are really near and dear to my heart because it's something that I've seen modeled from folks in my time working in corporate America, as well as working in nonprofits, just being able to say, hey, you know what? I think back to maybe 2015, 2016, when we saw some of the first cuts in funding to support some of the nonprofits. We had really real conversations about what was happening and how we could sustain in that moment. Without that candor, without that type of radical candor, without bringing folks in and creating an environment that makes it a safe space for those types of moments and conversations, you don't often get the outputs that you're looking for. And you don't want folks tiptoeing around or moving from a place of scarcity or fear. You want to make sure that it's one that is really a culture of buy-in. And I think that a lot of C-suite leaders that we've worked with have had that opportunity to create that space. And I think a part of the work that we've helped them do is to see where, in conversations with some of their other members of their team, so doing different levels of engagement and different levels of discovery to unpack, here's what we're hearing from these folks directly that they might not have shared with a C-suite leader on a one-on-one basis. We can help close some of those feedback loops so that they have the intelligence that they know, like, oh, okay, this isn't hit where it needs to hit. Okay, got it. And now we can really pivot by coming up with some potential solutions and get that buy-in so that folks feel like they're a part of the decision-making and that they're at the table, not just having things handed to them in a way that they don't want to be a part of what that transformation can look like.
Can you tell us what makes C-suite leaders a little bit different than your regular clientele?
I think what makes C-suite leaders different than our regular clientele is that It's really, I think, one aspect of it is the people management. So I think because when you asked that question, I thought immediately about a small business owner. I'm like, you know what? A small business owner has to manage all of these different pieces. I know I have to manage all these different pieces. The difference is when you're managing and having to motivate people, managing and motivating people is very different, right? Like people, we all come with our lived experiences. We all come with the things that we wear in our 9 to 5s as well as the stuff that we wear in our 5 to 9. So the stuff outside of business that's happening in life impacts how we show up at work. And when we think about intrinsic motivation, when we think about how we're getting people on board to do things, people need to see themselves as a part of that work, as a part of that ecosystem, as a part of that world. And C-suite leaders have to manage that. It's walking a tightrope in a different kind of capacity because you're trying to balance the business objectives with the people as well. And the people are the ones who are helping you execute and do the work on a day-to-day basis. Um, so how we think culturally about what leadership looks like and what adaptive leadership needs to look like, being able to be nimble, being able to respond, but keep your eyes on the prize and keep your eyes on the business objectives. It's hard and it's not easy. And I think that what I've seen done really well in most of the environments that I've worked in is having those executives who are willing to sponsor new and innovative ideas, who are willing to raise and elevate the concerns of members of the team and really sit and work through those challenges and create those spaces for learning so that everyone sees that it's safe to challenge ideas and come up with new solutions in a way that is productive and in a way that is really that really contributes to what the overarching goal of the division or the company looks like. But that takes time and that takes space, and it's not one that just comes out of nowhere. You've got to make it, and you've got to make it each and every day.
Mhm. So, so as you go through and you got these particular, you got a lot of C-suite leaders that you deal with. Can you tell us, like, what does the diversity look like, and are you doing a lot of consulting on the diversity side when it comes to that?
And when you say diversity, do you mean around like diversity, equity, and inclusion, or like the diversity of the leaders themselves?
Both.
Both. Okay, so I'd say we work with a number of leaders who are Black, Brown, who come from marginalized LGBTQ plus communities, and we also work with leaders who are of any race. We don't have any preclusions around working with folks of any race or ethnicity. I think one of the things um, that makes this conversation really special is that we're at a time now in our nation's history where we've got leaders who are trying to navigate a lot of external pressures around what inclusion needs to look like, around what access to opportunity needs to look like. And I think we're really fortunate to support a number of C-suite individuals and business owners around what that work looks like in practice, while also knowing that diversity is really our strength. So how we get new experiences, different voices, and then also different opinions into the room. It makes our solutions richer. It makes our outputs better because we're getting lenses on things that we wouldn't have had we not had those folks in the room. I'm really excited to see what diversity and leadership can look like as we think about the growth and evolution of our society. I know that there were some recent reports out around it was a shocking statistic around, I believe, 300,000 Black women leaving the workforce, for example. And I think about like what that means in terms of the next generation and the current generation of leaders, what that means for Black and Brown and other women and folks who are identifying in that space around what leadership looks like. We can't keep doing business as we've always done it. We've got to keep our eyes focused on what growth and evolution looks like. So as a diverse leader, working to run a business and working to empower folks, I get to be a bit of the change that I'm looking to see in the market, while also making sure that as we're working with individuals that we're learning from them and also challenging them to make room for others as well. And it's been a real privilege to have the opportunity to do that, particularly in this time and season of my life.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful. What's the most rewarding part of being a business advisor?
Hmm. I think the most rewarding part about being a business advisor is being able to have a client get it. Like when clients have those aha moments, when it's like, oh, it's like I'm not trying to be. I'm not trying to have a gotcha moment where it's just like,